Welcome to this week's edition of Coach Prep. This week I'm flying solo again. We've got a really good show lined up for you this week. Before we get into the topic of helping players understand how to take better care of the fields they play on, let's talk about patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. If you see value in what we're doing, if you would love the podcast to continue to move forward, we definitely need more people to come on board. We've had a great group of patrons that have supported us for a long time. We have 2 new patrons that have just jumped on board. Travis and Otis, thank you both very much for becoming patrons and supporting the podcast. We certainly hope that more people will see value in what we're doing. The podcast business, is just something that gets more and more expensive all the time. And the fact that we've got a good group of patrons have kept the margins small enough, the deficit small enough that we can, justify continuing to do it. But we definitely need to see more people coming on board. And patrons, you're the people that allow us to do things like the Player of the Week t-shirts and stuff like that. So we want to keep that stuff moving forward. The only way that's going to happen is for more of you to become patrons. So patreon.com/everythingfastpitch. So something that I always believed in that I think is a tremendous skill that we can teach our players that goes along with the idea of them respecting the facilities that they use is teaching them some basic fundamental skills about field maintenance and things that they can do to keep the places that they play nice. Now, obviously, we've talked in the past a lot about cleaning out the dugout, taking all your trash with you, doing those kinds of things to leave the facility that you're leaving at least as nice or nicer than it was when you got there. Leaving a tornado of trash and stuff behind is just not acceptable. And I think everybody understands that, just being a good person, cleaning up after yourself and not leaving a mess is kind of a fundamental thing. And we've talked about that a lot. But what we're going to talk about today is helping players understand that softball fields, just by the nature of our game, and especially now that so many kids wear metal spikes, we do so much damage to softball fields just by practicing and playing that if we can help our players understand that there's some very simple things that they can do or that they can help with, whether it's raking or picking up rocks, whatever it might be, not digging such a deep hole when they step into the batter's box, all those different kinds of things that are things that we can practice, that we can work on as coaches to help our players do a better job. One of the things that has always been heartbreaking to me, because of course I spent most of my life working at schools where I was the grounds crew. When the pitcher's mound got tore up, I was the one that had to fix it. When the batter's boxes got tore up, I was the one that had to fix it. When somebody did something and tore up the field in some way, shape, or form, I was always the person that had to get out there and figure out a way to, 1, scrounge up the money to do it, and 2, the time and the energy to fix whatever needed to be fixed. So does that mean that we should expect our players to be out there dragging the field after every practice or every game? That might be a little bit much, but there's also nothing wrong with us teaching them how to rake in their position to, get rid of the divots that they've created by practicing and playing. There's nothing wrong with us teaching them how to rake back in around home plate or the catcher's box or the pitcher's mound to allow us to, keep the facility nice. If you have a place that you're practicing, that field needs to be maintained. And usually, if you're in some sort of an agreement where you're renting a facility, sometimes, you would expect them to then have the responsibility. But no matter who's ultimately responsible for the care of the field, we want to teach our players how to do things in a better way so that they can help with the maintenance a little bit, but also so maybe they're a little bit more aware of the damage that they can be doing. If you have a pitcher getting ready to pitch in a game, one of the worst things that we can do is allow them to drag and pitch on the outfield dirt. But I see it all the time where they will use the foul line fence as their backstop. So the catcher will be by the fence and the pitchers are out there somewhere, usually around the foul line, but sometimes even in the field of play, dragging while they're pitching. Now, obviously, that's part of their warm-up, but we need to teach them that every time they do that on the field, they're creating a rut and a divot and damage that somebody else is going to have to come back and fix. If they're doing that kind of thing on the dirt and tearing up the field right before they're going to play on it, that's going to create a situation that somebody else is going to have to deal with, whether it's a position player on their team or on the other team. again, if they understand that they can rake it back in and that raking it back in solves the problem, then maybe they'll be a little bit more aware of the fact that they could avoid tearing it up in the first place. If they know that they're killing the grass by warming up on it, by pitching on it, then maybe we can help them understand that there's other places or other spots on the field that maybe they could use and not create so much damage and cause so much aggravation for somebody else. And the more of those kinds of things that we teach our players, sometimes it's up to us as coaches, because kids don't know what they don't know. And if you say, Sally, go warm up for the game, and she looks out there and sees, this wide open grass spot in the outfield, in her mind, she's probably thinking, hey, that's a nice wide open space. That'd be a good place for me to warm up. But what she's probably going to end up doing is creating a divot, a hole, a trench, whatever it is that, again, that's going to create problems for other people. So let's help our players, understand the damage that they do when they play and they practice, and then they can learn to mitigate that as much as possible. Now, there's some things that you just cannot help. But again, does a hitter really need to dig and scratch and claw, 6 or 8 inches deep at home plate every time? Now, if the field's super screwed up, then they do that because they got to kick the loose dirt out. But typically what ends up happening is while they're doing that, they're also continuing to dig a deeper hole. And those kinds of things, again, if we're helping our players understand that those things create work for other people, then I think that helps them think twice about what they're doing. And what's the best way for them to understand the work for other people is to let them do some of the work themselves. I guarantee you that a player who spends a little bit of time with a rake in her hands after practice, raking in her position, has a whole nother level of respect for what goes on that field. If she's got to spend a little bit of time helping you, repack home plate or repack the pitcher's mound after practice to, keep it nice and solid, they're going to have a whole lot of respect for it and understand what goes into it. And so for me, as a college coach, we always had a list of jobs that every player had to do or that the team was responsible for. And ours was done on a seniority basis. The senior players had the quote unquote easier jobs. The freshmen and new players had the harder jobs. But everybody worked their way through the system. And so everybody knew how to handle a rake. Everybody knew how to run a broom. Everybody knew how to pack dirt. Everybody knew how to carry trash to the dumpster. And the more of those kinds of things that they did, the more respect they had for our facility, but also the better we treated other people's at the same time. So coaches, doesn't sound like much of a strategy thing, except I think that if we instill this kind of attitude in our players, we're going to see a benefit on the field as well. So teach your kids some things about taking care of the field, a little bit of field maintenance work, never killed anybody. And whether it's a field that you're playing on once in a while or a field that you practice and play on all the time, let's help our kids understand that they can make it nicer, they can keep it nicer, and everybody will be happier if they do. So that's going to wrap up this edition of Coach Prep. Please make sure you reach out to us at everythingfastpitch@gmail.com or fastpitchprep@gmail.com with questions, comments, ideas, or suggestions. Please go to patreon.com/everythingfastpitch, become a patron. Again, thank you very much to Travis and Otis for being our newest patrons. And please do support the podcast if you can. So for Coach Don McKinley and our producer, Stan Lewis, this is Coach Torrey saying thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.